What up, familia? It's your favorite Puerto Rican Brooklyn Philly, and I'm back with another message. I felt compelled, right? As I asked God what message would be, I heard appropriate, needed, relevant at this time. I saw the yield sign. I also saw keys. I heard keys to the kingdom, key opportunity as I'm shuffling. So there is yield, slow down, right? Be patient. There is a key that is being revealed to you at this time. Possibly in this message, you will find a key lesson I'm hearing. I was led to put on my TV there's on Netflix, there's this thing that if you say you want to have the fireplace with embers kindling in the background burning, they give you this beautiful fireplace scene, and I have that currently on my TV. I took notice of it, or note of it, the other day, because when I was doing one of the readings this past week, I felt compelled to use the word embers. And I remember recalling, interesting, I don't typically use that word in my everyday English vocabulary. So it stuck with me. And then to see that that was like embedded in the title with the fireplace, and then it rose up within me again this today as I was, asking for what word wanted to come forth to the community that I am creating, that I am establishing. And I'm hearing not that I am calling in, but that is being called in, but I am the vehicle being used to call it in, right? I am being a steward over, right? I am merely the steward over, right? And that's not a belittling thing. That's actually a great honor, I'm hearing, right? But one that is to be taken, as I've been reminded in the last two readings, with great care and understanding that there's great responsibility behind it, right? And one that I would be held accountable for as well. And today, as I heard embers, I felt compelled to come to the Bible, and this book that I recently bought. It's called The Dog Who Followed the Moon, and practice some bibliomancy. And the scripture that stood out that made reference to rekindling of embers, right, were found in, there were several, but the one that stood out was in Second Timothy, actually chapter 1 verse 6, and it reads, "For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying of my hands." And this is Paul the apostle, right? We're told that this is Paul the apostle writing the second letter to Timothy. And in this second letter, interestingly enough, it's known, or they have referenced it in this Bible as his famous last words, right? A cliche that we typically hear as they reference here, right? We just heard someone's famous last words, and those famous last words we tend to turn into memes and quotes, and and typically, right, when a loved one is dying, or anyone that we care or hold to such esteem is dying, we're carefully hearing, right, paying very close attention to the pearls of wisdom that they drop to us or say to us prior to their departure from this realm. And in First Timothy, we learn that Paul had ordained Timothy. Timothy was a young pastor and became the pastor, I think, of the church at Ephesus. And in this Second Timothy was so beautiful, because I'm remembering my own Bible journey. One of the scriptures that I'm very familiar with is, "I have reminded you of your sincere faith," which is the verse right before the 6:115. And it reads, "I have been reminded of your sincere faith." This is Paul talking to Timothy, "which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also." And there's a beauty about that, right? Because it is talking about the effect, the impact that we have over another. Particularly, in this case, they're referencing a grandmother and a mother, but Spirit has been teasing out, if we're talking about leadership, if we're talking about forming common unity, right, forming community and gathering of I wanted to say like-minded individuals, but there's something more, that doesn't sound very apropos. I'm hearing is because it's limited if it's just to like-minded individuals. In a sense, there's this sense of differing individuals coming together for a common purpose, right? We can be unified in a common goal or purpose, right? Or have a central focus for a time being or whatever, right? But we still are in our own autonomy, our own identity, our own authenticity, right? There's a danger about becoming zombie like or automated, right? Or yeah. So side note to that, but there is this beauty in saying can see some of the similar characteristics or traits or attributes, right, that you Timothy carry. And it doesn't surprise me because I know your grandmother and I knew your mother, and I saw the faith that they carried, not only in word but in deed and in action. And it's beautiful to see that faith, right, and that deed and action also come through you. So there's something about passing the torch, right? And I know he's talking about leadership as well, and not just familial, because although he mentions, which is beautiful too, right, that he's mentioning the grandmother and the mother, women at that, right? He didn't say your grandfather and your father. He said your grandmother, right? And mentioned her by name, right? Lois, and in your mother, Eunice, right? Which is significant, particularly for this time period. But even though, people have their quirks and qualms with Paul and women, nevertheless, this scripture clearly identifies both of these women. However, there, in addition to, we see that Paul is also talking about himself and how he laid hands on him, right? That was in the 6th verse. And I don't mean this to be a Bible study, but it is what it is, right? If you're still here with me, then you're supposed to be here with me. And I hope this resonates and is helpful to you in some kind of way. But it says, for this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. So we know that in 1 Timothy, Paul had laid hands on Timothy and had awakened, right, the gifts, or this gift. I think particularly in Timothy, they're referencing the gift of charisma, for he was a preacher and a teacher, right? And he's reminding him of that. But there's also, now I'm hearing Elijah and Elisha, this transference, right, of what happens from leader to, what did he call him here? So like a student. But I really like, when I was reading it, the word that they used here. When he referred to Timothy as his, okay, I'll move forward. But right, it's like an apprentice, right? A mentor and a mentee, the relationship that can, and the beautiful relationship that is developed between a mentor and a mentee, right? So much so that they become almost like a parental figure, right? To Paul, who, from what we understand, never had his own biological children, but saw Timothy as a son, right? So there's again this importance to, or importance of leadership, right? And the role, right? Yeah, the other day it was about the beehive. The Spirit used the beehive to show that dynamic. And I don't know why I just went blank like that. That was very interesting. Okay, I'm going to move forward. It'll come back to me. But that was interesting. I also was led to flip open the book. Like I said, the dog who followed the moon, and it fell onto page 90 and 91, where in it quote says, "You know," said the wolf, looking up at the midday sun, "my mother used to tell me something too. She said if you walked in the sunlight, luck would walk with you." Amaya looked suspicious. "Really?" The wolf nodded in what he hoped was an earnest manner. Amaya raised an eyebrow. "Well, I suppose it's better than nothing." And they're traveling, right? They're on this journey, and there's this reference to the sun being this ball of fire again, this ember, this spark, right? And there was something about in Second Timothy, Paul finding it necessary to encourage Timothy because, after First Timothy, now Timothy has been in the ministry for quite some time and surely was undergoing, right, life, right? Life has started lifing for Timothy, both within the church context and the role and that leadership role and all that comes with that, right? So there is something about acknowledging. See, there's something about a lot of the times, and I think this is the distinction Spirit has been making and why it's been poignant or important to point out that, it's bigger than clout chasing or clickbait, right? Because if you're doing it from that intentionality, then when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, right? Or you quit, you give up because it was never innately within you. You really never cared for that community. It really wasn't about building and healing and restoring and legacy, right? And doing what it has been pointed out, that a grandmother and the mother and now Timothy, and then Timothy is doing it with the flock, and then hopefully, right, that this becomes like a domino effect that just keeps going, or ripples, right, that just keep growing and extending out. When it becomes about clickbaiting, or I'm just an ego trip, I'm just doing it for likes, or my own personal fame, when the difficulty arises, right? Because it's not, I'm hearing, all glitz and glamour, right? There are going to be the negative comments, what we call the haters, right? But we understand that in the spirit sense, right? And even taking it beyond the spirit sense, right? If we're looking at it from a human perspective, we are all different, right? Number one, thankfully, that should be honored. And in that differences, we're all on different levels of our own individual journeys in life. And based on our experiences and on our experiences, right? We may have, the world may be colored, or we maybe see things from different, well, we definitely see them from different perspectives. But in depending on where we at and who we are and what we've experienced, at times it may be tainted more than in others, right? And as a result, we can act out, lash out in an array of ways, right? I'm really trying to move away from that language that, people are haters and low vibrational. And then I get it. Confirmation. I know that we as individuals, we're trying to once again categorize, right? And compartmentalize and outline so that we can make the distinctions and things of that nature. But, right, at the end of the day, we're all human going through this very human experience called life. And life is life, and for all of us, and not necessarily in the exact same ways has it or continues to, life for us, and if I am mindful of that, then it really takes the sting sometimes out of things, and it really helps me to understand that a lot of the times it's not really personal, right? It's not and helps me and allows, I think, hopefully for us to look on to things with a little more compassion and wisdom, right? It doesn't mean that because I can look at upon a person and their actions with compassion that then I then no longer have boundaries or don't make decisions where that it may be because of the situation that that person finds themselves in and where I find myself, then we may need to separate whatever the decision may be. However, the language of you know, where we kind of stratify and lower others and raise others, you know. Maybe that was a side note. I'm just trying to be more conscious and careful with that, right, for myself. Yeah. So because of that, because of the importance of leadership roles and the impact and the effect that they will have on the communities that we're serving. And in Timothy's case, as I can imagine, right, as we can imagine, right, because we're going back and trying to put ourselves in the context of that time and place, being a new religion at the time, right? Called the Way, very different, right? Perspective from Judaism and even the Roman a way of life. It seemed that Timothy may have needed some encouragement, right? And I can relate, right? There have been times, and yeah, very recently. I don't need to tell y'all all my business how recent, but where I have struggled with doubt, right? And wanting to quit, right? And wanting and questioning what am I doing and why am I doing what I'm doing, right? Again, we tend to think that this walk of or the role of leadership is all glam and glitz and you know, we see the people when they're in those roles and we may see maybe the fame, the money, or even the attention, but rarely do we see the struggles, the attention, right? The time, the sweat, blood, and tears that it took to cultivate and create and to, you know, even on a daily basis, stand in integrity and honesty and hold back from doing and saying and being a whole lot of things that, you know, on some days you want to do, be, and say. And I don't know, maybe that's another call in this message is for people to, for all of us to be reminded that maybe we should be a little more open and honest in the journey and the actual process of the journey. I think a lot of times, you know, whether you're a pastor, an educator, whatever the position you hold, sometimes we'll see the title of the position and the actual position and maybe some of the benefits or the advantages of it, but we don't necessarily share the struggles behind it and the preparation, right? In the time, I remember speaking with my son, I'm being reminded of like creating some type of like when we look at like people like that we hold in high esteem, like, you know, with him it was Michael Jordan at the time. But I would remind him, yes, but did you know, if you read his biography, that it says Michael Jordan would get up 5 a.m. and go to school very early and practice for hours before school even started. I think there was something about really not having breakfast. I think there was something about not really having sneakers. You know, the two young men, the brothers, Akin Matumbo, you know, when you saw his movie, and I just messed up that young man's name, and not by disrespect, but I really can't pronounce it. But when I saw his Disney special, they said, you know, you saw the struggle that his parents had, just like getting citizenship, coming over, but that his brother and him would go to practice, and one would take off his pairs of sneakers, so while the other one went in and balled, and then would come back and switch sneakers and stuff. My point is that we tend to see all the fame, Serena Williams and her sister, Venus and Serena. Serena and Venus. I don't know why I said Serena. No disrespect. It was Serena and Venus. When we saw the movie that they made with Will Smith, King Richard, we saw, here they were. It was a struggle. When we think of the Jackson 5 family and we look at their autobiography, we see the struggle. But a lot of the times, I think we see the fame and the glitz and the glory of stuff, and we don't see that there's real intentionality, real struggles, real hard works, blood, tears, and sacrifice that is made by grandmothers, mothers, grandfathers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, siblings, right? I'm thinking now. I just heard Kiki Palmer, right? She says, "Yeah, I'm the star of my family or whatever, but I have a lot of responsibility. I'm taking care of my family, so it comes with a cost. And if you're not serious about that, confirmation calling, right? It's very easy to, in tough times, give up." And walk away. And Paul is very intentional of reminding him of his gift and telling him, I'm not there, because Paul was in prison and about to die. This is his last words, literally, to Timothy. And not just to Timothy, this letter was used to not only encourage Timothy, but the church and the movement forward. For Paul was about to be murdered, right? He was sitting in a prison when he wrote this letter. I'm thinking of Dr. King now. May he rest in peace as well. May they both rest in peace, right? But I'm hearing David, he encouraged himself. So there's something about rekindling the embers, right, of your gifting, right? What is your gifting? What are you covering up, sitting on, sleeping on, and then in the book we just read about the sun and following the sun. And the wolf said, my mother used to say, right, there's something about passing down, right, gems, pearls, words of wisdom, right, and specifically prior to passing, right. And then I was led to pick the ancestor deck, right. There's something about even after passing, the ancestors still speaking, right, the ancestors speaking, and also reminding us, right, of what our giftings are, what our callings are, and they're not to be sat on, they're not to be covered, right. Once again, now I'm hearing that. I heard it the other day in one of the readings, do you hide light under a bushel, right? No, you don't. There's something about you being called out, whatever that calling may be for you, right? We're all, no matter who you are, we're born with giftings, right? We're all gifted. And the cowrie shells wanted to show themselves. And ancestry, see? The ancestors are calling you out, right? And they're saying, yeah, it was passed down generations to generations. There's a gift or gifts, right, that you are sitting on, that are being asked at this time. And I'm here for 2026, right? I'm doing this on the 27th, a couple of days before what the U.S. considers the new year, which is interesting, right? It bothers me a little bit. And this is just side note, my own ish. But, the spring isn't really till March, right? And then the new astrology, zodiac wheel starts, right? Which that would signify really the new year, right? Springing into the new year. Then we're very much in winter season, right? So that's for somebody. There's something there. And maybe utilizing this spirit. Interesting, I said this spirit. I meant to say this period of winter, of hibernation, of hermiting, right? Now I'm thinking of a cave, and a bear in a cave, right? To rekindle those embers, right? So that when spring cometh, right, they're burning bright. Is brightly burn, of our Savior's Holy night. Down on your knees. I can't sing it, but and hear the angels' voices. Yeah, there's something about a calling, right? And a calling out, right? And you know, what if we're all being called, right? Now, you know, I just heard a crescendo of the angels in heavens now saying this is the time for all of us to arise, right? And to rekindle, right? The embers within our gifts, right? To rekindle the gifts, to fan the flame again, right? And to let them burn bright once again, right? And to pass it on generation to generation, to be very intentional about the legacies that we want to leave behind, right? Yeah. And that was all channeling about 25 minutes worth. Well, channeling in the Bible. This came out the other day, right? Caution, traffic cones, and the caution word came out the other day in the meaning, and what I got was, you know, when you're driving maybe, and the police all of a sudden have checkpoints where they might do, like, I don't know, breathalyzers or just check, right? There's something about checkpoints again, right? And then balance came out. That's the purpose for the caution. That's the purpose for the slowdown, right? The slowdown is important, right? Interesting, I mentioned winter, right? The hibernation period, right? So now I'm seeing the seasons, right? Each season has its purpose, right? And in each one, we should be seeking this homeostasis, right? This balance. Endings. I can't make it out. Oh, March. Didn't I just say spring 11? March 11th may be significant for somebody. So literally, you know, this period from now until March is your time, you know, right, to slow down, to use caution, to use it for balancing purposes, right? Balancing of oneself, balancing of one's surroundings. Understanding that we're finalizing something, something is ending. And look at the bottom of the deck, sunflower action. Yes, before we jump into action. So yeah, this is definitely for those who are listening to this reading. Yeah, this is very important, right? It's very important because I'm hearing this is the period to rekindle the embers, not to go full force with them yet, right? So what happens usually January 1st, in a couple of days, everybody's going full speed ahead with like all types of goals, whether it's for the gym, for the fitness. And there's something about an honoring of the space that we're in, right? And again,